Now we are going to see that how the drugs actually inhibit the function of enzymes. So how they can inhibit the function? They can actually inhibit the attachment of substrate. We have just noticed that they can actually block the binding site. So how they can block the binding site, we are going to discuss here. They can actually compete with the natural substrate. Let's say this is an enzyme. Let's say this is an enzyme. This is the active site, right? And let's say this is the substrate. So as you can see that substrate has a certain kind of shape which can actually fit into the active site, and it can create a complex, right? This is the natural mechanism. But if the drug is there, so let's say this is a drug, so this drug is actually having the same shape as you can see of the substrate. So what does it do actually? The drug actually compete with the substrate, and instead of forming an enzyme substrate complex, this drug fit into this place, forming a drug enzyme complex. So that means it is just blocking the site, blocking the active site. And if there won't be any active site, so where the substrate will bind and how the reaction will get catalyzed. So by this way, you can say it is actually competing with the substrate and just blocking the active site. And these kind of drugs are called as competitive inhibitors, because they are actually competing with the substrate, and instead of forming the substrate enzyme complex, instead of that, drug enzyme complexes formed. So the drug enzyme complex is formed, so therefore the activity is inhibited. Secondly, how it can actually block the site. Sometimes what happens, like let's say this is an enzyme and this is an active site. So sometimes the enzyme has some other site also called as allosteric site. Allosteric site. So sometimes instead of binding here, the drug gets bind at allosteric site. And when it binds with the allosteric site, it actually bring about the change in the shape of the active site. As you can see, like when the drug is not binded to this allosteric site, you can see that the substrate is having the same shape which can fit into the active site. But what happened, this drug, let's say this is drug, this bind to an allosteric site and what does it cause? It causes the change in the shape of the active site. As you can see that the drug when binds here, the active site is actually changed, the shape is changed. Now in this given shape, you know that this substrate can't bind, and even the substrate cannot recognize the active site. So there again, the enzyme substrate complex is not formed and activity of enzyme is inhibited. So if you're going to get a question like this, you are going to say that either they can act as competitive inhibitors, in which the drug have actually the same shape as the substrate and it is actually competing with the substrate. And secondly, there can be a chance that the drug do not bind at active site. Instead of that, it bind to some other site called as allosteric site, which cause the change in the shape of active site, and the enzyme cannot, the substrate cannot recognize. So therefore, no complex, no reaction catalyzed, and the activity of the enzyme is inhibited. So in these two manners, the drug can actually inhibit the activity of enzyme, and when the activity of enzyme is inhibited, many reactions are going to suffer, because there are many chemical reactions in the body which are catalyzed by the enzymes.